Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. There are reports that Emerson Mnangagwa and Welshman Ncube are having a dialogue, political dialogue. We do not have to ask what they're talking about. We know what they're talking about. For Mnangagwa, he wants to sanitize his illegitimacy. He blatantly rigged the elections. He was hoping that CCC's participation in those flawed elections would give him legitimacy. That didn't work. SADC election observers, AU election observers, condemned those elections as a farce. Yes, his friends, CCC, participated. Indeed, Chamisa was so hell-bent on participating that he claimed that Zanu PF was not going to rig those elections. He had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Even when people were saying, how could you have done that when we don't even have something as basic as the verified voters roll? He brushed that aside. Mnangagwa himself was boasting that he's frog marching the electorate with Zanu PF official in the front, the people following him, and behind him, the headman, who is the party had already bribed, and he was no more than the Zanu PF political commissar in the village. They were all being frog marched to the polling station. And he, it's on public record, made it abundantly clear that there is no such thing as a secret vote in Zimbabwe. The party would know whom you voted for. And indeed, that was also true. And yet, regardless of all that evidence, Chamisa still maintained that he was going to yes, plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. He was just hell-bent on participating. He knew Zanu PF was rigging those elections. He knew by participating he'll give Zanu PF legitimacy. But most important of all, he and his colleagues knew that Zanu PF will give away a few gravitational seats to entice the opposition to participate. Their reward for participating. And those few gravitational seats was what they were after. Poor Chamisa, of course, he didn't realize that some of his colleagues in CCC had their own plans. No sooner had the result been declared and they had all taken up their seats, even when SADC and the AU had said those elections were flawed and illegal. SADC, CCC leaders did not bother to listen to that. They claimed the seats they had won were in liberated zones. That means elections in those liberated zones were free, fair, and credible. But no sooner had they taken up their seats that somebody else in CCC decided that they wanted the system for themselves. And so poor Chamisa and his cronies were ambushed. Tsvangirai started recalling them, claiming that he was the Secretary General of CCC. The party had no structures, had no elected officials. Chamisa had literally appointed himself and a few others around him as the president of the party. And so he could not prove that Tsvangirai was the Secretary General. The courts were not convinced. When they asked him to produce the evidence, who is the Secretary General then? He could not. And so the recall was acted upon. And so a lot of Chamisa's colleagues, cronies, found themselves put out of parliament before they had even warmed the seats. And a few months later, he himself resigned from the party in a huff, in despair, claiming that Zanu PF had infiltrated the party. And now, those who had taken over CCC are the ones negotiating with Mnangagwa. The trouble with Zimbabwe politics is that we have always had politicians who would sell their own mothers for the right bribe and be proud they had a mother to sell. That has been a weakness in Zimbabwe politics. Ian Smith was quick to realize that, and hence he created the 1978 Zimbabwe-Rhodesia Internal Settlement. And he did have takers. Ebo Muzorewa and Dawaning Story signed up to that internal settlement. He offered them the right bribe, and they couldn't resist it. Mugabe did the same thing. Soon after independence, he started bribing his own Zanu PF, fellow Zanu PF leaders, with the trappings of high office, ministerial limos, the nice houses, the general salaries and allowances. And they, in return, became yes men. Margaret Dongo was to call them Vakadzi wa Mugabe. In sheer frustration at how Zanu PF leaders always groveled to Mugabe. They never challenged him on anything. Even at the time when Mugabe was committing the heinous acts of the Gukurahundi massacre, the Zanu PF cabinet members never raised a finger. Absolutely, utterly useless. Mugabe was to do the same thing with MDC leaders during the GNU. He bribed them too with the usual trappings of high office. The rose-tinted ministerial limousines, the very generous salaries and allowances. And for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the $4 million mansion in Highlands. MDC leaders completely forgot, forgot about the reforms. Not even SADC leaders who were nagging them to follow the global political agreement roadmap to implement the reforms could get them to implement even one token reform. The rest is history. And now Mnangagwa, after blatantly rigging the elections, he thought, he was convinced that as long as he has got the opposition participating, and they did participate in the usual numbers, he would have no problem. No problem at all getting SADC and the AU to rubber stamp those elections as they've done in the past. Unfortunately, this time, SADC, election observers, forgot that script. They could not deny that those elections were farce. How can you say the elections are free, fair, and credible when you don't even have a verified voters roll? When voters are being frog marched to attend rallies, there's no free media. The regime is spending money hand over fist, bribing all those involved in the election process, including the judges. 400,000 US dollars housing allowance given a few weeks before the nomination day, because the courts were handling the nomination and the whole electoral process. Of course, it was a bribe. They knew it was a bribe. They accepted it as a bribe. And we keep talking about, oh, Zanu PF, Zimbabwe's judiciary is independent. Independent? What are you talking about? This is a captured judiciary. Just as much as the police, we also, the army, you name it, including the opposition itself. There's no denying that the opposition participated in the flawed elections out of greed. And now, Welshman who has taken over from Chamisa is negotiating with Mnangagwa out of greed. Nothing has changed there. We keep doing the same thing over and over again. The tragedy here for Zimbabwe is that the people themselves have been very slow in reading what is happening. MDC leaders have been on the political stage for the last 24 years, including 5 in the GNU. They've failed to implement even one democratic reform because they sold out. Why, even after 24 years, some people are failing to see that beggars belief? But of course, the opposition themselves have taken advantage of that ignorance. And so it has been business as usual. I think the SADC election observer team last year did Zimbabweans a great favor. by coming out and condemning those flawed elections. We know that SADC accepted that report, but they could not do anything about it. For one thing, the opposition, Zimbabwe's opposition, had participated in those flawed elections. Millions of ordinary Zimbabweans had participated in those flawed elections. And so the excuse was, if Zimbabweans are happy with flawed elections, why should outsiders interfere? The opposition, Triple C, have been playing a double game. Before the election, they claimed they plugged all the vote-taking loopholes to entice people to participate. As soon as the elections results are out, they happily take up the few gravity seats that they've won, and to keep up their pretense, they claim Zanu PF rigged the elections. And when they were asked, why, if Zanu PF rigged the elections, are you accepting the gravity seats? They didn't want to give up those gravity seats, so they had to come up with some feeble excuse. Oh, those seats that they've won, they are in liberated zones. They must hang on to those liberated zones. Yeah, but you accept also that by hanging on to those liberated zones, you're sacrificing the national cause, which is that we must have free, fair, and credible elections, not only in urban centers, but all over Zimbabwe. And in any case, that was. How can you say the elections in urban centers were free, fair, and credible when there was no verified voters roll? The urban voters faced the same level of frustration as the rural voters. Yes, Zanu PF was very careful to make sure that Triple C will win those urban seats, those few gravitron seats. But Zanu PF will win the presidency and the majority in parliament. And by infiltrating Triple C, Zanu PF has since secured itself in more than 2/3 majority in parliament, because most of the by-elections, as a result of the recalls by Tawangu, Zanu PF has mopped up all those seats to give itself a supermajority in parliament. There is no denying that MDC, ever since the 2008 to 2013 GNU, have been playing a double game. They've been playing as Zanu PF Team B, whose primary purpose is to make sure that Team A wins and get political legitimacy. And in return, they get a few gravitron seats, the bribe. I think the pressure on Mnangagwa to accept that he is illegitimate is on. In 9 days' time, South Africans are going to vote. There is no doubt that ANC government in South Africa has propped up Zanu PF for decades. Just before the 2023 elections in 2022, ANC had their own Congress at which they passed a resolution that they would not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. The level of arrogance of that is unbelievable. The main reason for it is that South Africans, ANC was afraid that if there was to be regime change in Zimbabwe, South Africans may want to do the same thing with the ANC. ANC knew Zanu PF rigged elections in the past, and they were going to rig the 2023 elections. But they were prepared to pretend that the rigging was necessary to stop regime change. And there's no doubt that SADC would have denied Zanu PF political legitimacy if ANC had not been so supportive. But a bloody nose to ANC in 9 days' time could send a clear message to that party, even if they should win those elections and either form the new government on their own or as a coalition, but the message would have been sent that their cozy relationship with a vote rigging Zanu PF in Zimbabwe is not something that South Africans should tolerate, and rightly so too. Zimbabwe is a failed state, and its economic and political instability is destabilizing the whole region. In South Africa, yes, they may have benefited in other ways by having Zimbabweans working in South Africa, but there's also been a price that the instability in Zimbabwe have destabilized South Africa itself. The corruption in Zimbabwe has encouraged corruption in South Africa itself. And I think South Africans have got to wake up to that reality. That encouraging a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF regime in Zimbabwe is not in South Africa's best interest. In the short term, medium, or long term. That is the truth. These talks between Mugabe and Mnangagwa is try to preempt the pressure that may come from SADC, because it's rumored that some SADC leaders have insisted that the August summit should still discuss the issue of Zimbabwe elections. And Mnangagwa is hoping that he will be able to bribe Welshman Nuwe and CCC, so they come out in full force in support of Mnangagwa and proclaim him to be legitimate. Give this impression to SADC that Zimbabweans have resolved this problem. The issue of legitimacy is no longer relevant. Yes, we expect, of course, Welshman Nuwe and his CCC friends to sell out This is not the first time they sold out, nor is it the last time they will sell out. I think what the people of Zimbabwe must say, and say loudly and clearly, is that Mnangagwa rigged the 2023 elections. And he was only able to rig because CCC, MDC before them had failed to implement the democratic reforms because they sold out. We have got to put an end to this political culture that those in power can sell the national cause for a few pieces of silver. This has got to end. These talks between Mnangagwa and Ncube have no political value to the people of Zimbabwe. It should only serve to emphasize the need to end this culture of politicians selling out for selfish gain. Mnangagwa rigged the 2023 elections. Mnangagwa is illegitimate. That is the reality on the ground. And no amount of talking or bribes will end that reality. And as we move to 2028, we want to see that this is not repeated. We cannot have another rigged elections in Zimbabwe. That is simply unthinkable. And this kind of political selling out, if it's allowed to carry on, is exactly what will drag us into another rigged election in 2028. This is why this Mnangagwa political dialogue must be condemned, must be seen for what it is and condemned. These are two individuals selling out. Enough is enough. Thank you very much, those who were able to join the talk, and I hope we'll see you soon. Have a good day.